properties, console, properties, volume, let's go to 200%. Hello. Audio check करने मिल से तुमने? It's working, right? Okay, I'm audible. Alright, let's start this session. Hello everyone, welcome to our third session, our Android Study Jams. It's presented to you by our Jain University Google Developers Students Club. I'm Oscar and I'm a facilitator for the Android Study Jams this year. Our Android Study Jam started in 29th November and it ends on 10th of January. So it ends this week. Till date, we have conducted 2 live sessions and many posts regarding Android Study Jams in our social media handles, from where you could have received all those resources for continuing with this course. So in our previous live sessions, we covered some basics in Kotlin. We built our first Hello World application. We learned some fundamental concepts of Kotlin and Android. We learned about all those folder structure. We learned about where to place what is activity life cycle, right? We learned all about that. So in case you have missed these live session, I would suggest that you go back to those first and then come back here. And so the main motive about Android Study Jams is this course right here. The link will be in description. This is the Android Basic in Kotlin course, and it is compiled by the Google developer team themselves. It has 6 units and it covers from basic to intermediate level of content. And this course will also help you to prepare for your Associate Android Developer Certificate examination. Right? So this is the course we have been following so far. Now, in today's session, I will walk you through what is view model. What is view binding. Okay. So view binding is a part of Android Jetpack library, which helps us to bind or connect views with our programming code. All right. So let's see that in action. First of all, I'll go back and I'll create a new project. Select an empty project. We'll call it view binding third session. Leave everything for default and make sure the language is selected to Kotlin. Click on finish. So if this is your first time loading a project, it's going to take some time. The Gradle will download some softwares, some packages to build this, so it might take some time in your end. Alright, so this is what a fresh project looks like. We have one activity called main activity, and this is the activity that launches first, and we have its corresponding layout file, right? So this is where we put our design for that screen. So first, before learning about view binding, let's see what we have been doing till date, right? So in our XML file, we have a constraint layout, which is our view group, and we have a text view, right, which is a view, and it's part of that view group. So let's change this constraint layout to something called frame layout first, right? Frame layout match parent, and I'll remove this. So I'm using frame layout here because in the later portion of this session we'll be using fragments, and for that I'm using frame layout. Next, let's have a linear layout inside here. Match parent orientation, let's have it a vertical orientation. Gravity, let's put it in the center, right? So you can't see anything, but there's a linear layout that's expanded to match its parent. The parent is the frame layout, this whole box that covers the whole screen, and linear layout is inside that, and it matches with the parent, right? So now inside the linear layout, let's have a text view. We'll wrap content. Let's pass in an ID of text view, and we'll give it a text. For now, let's give it a text at text view in main activity. All right. So this tools namespace is new to you, right? So what this namespace does is this tool namespace is being used by the Android framework, Android design view, right? So whatever the text parameter that we use, which the text view parameter, will only be rendered right now. So this won't get converted to your real app. All right. So if you want the text to be displayed in the app when you build this project, you would have to do Android text and then pass in whatever you want. So right now I'm gonna use the tools namespace to have a text, and the text is going to be text view in main activity, which you can see over here. It's displayed, and this is done. And below this I want a button, right? A button view. I'm going to wrap content, pass the ID as button. Alright, I need to check live chat, anything. Alright, some spam messages. Yeah, and similar with button, I'm gonna use a tools namespace to give it a text. I'll say button, right? So you can see a button is there. This looks a little clumsy, so I'll add a margin top. Let's add a 16 dp margin. Looks better. Alright, so that is it for our simple layout. We just have a text view and a button, right? Now let's go back to our main activity, and let's try to reference that view from our program. So normally what you would do without using view binding is you would create a late init variable called text view or anything of your choice, and this would be of your type text view. Similarly, you would have a button of type button, right? So you would declare a variable to hold the reference to that view, and after setting content view, you would initialize your variable, and you would use a very common method called find view by ID, and you would pass in the ID of your text view. So for me, that is text view. Simple, right? So this is what you would do commonly, right, when writing an application at first without using view binding. So this r.id is the ID resource that we have used over here, the ID resource holder, and text view is just the text view name, that ID that we have given, right? So if you control click on this, it's gonna navigate you back to this. So this means that you're referencing the correct view. And you would do the same for button. Find view by ID, r.id dot button. Right now, after you have a reference to your view, you would now change its parameters, and you would go like, text view, and you would change it. Let's change the text of that text view, and we would want welcome to Android. And for button, we would have to change the text to press me, right? So basically what is happening here is you have a variable that is referencing, that has a reference to your view, and with that reference, with that object, you are tapping into its property and then changing it. Now let's add set on click listener. So we can even you already know we made it during the dice rolling app, right? You can put on a listener to a button view, so that whenever user clicks on that button, the code inside this curly braces is going to be executed. For now, we will only be displaying a simple toast message. Application context. Don't worry about this. You pressed the button, and we're gonna pass toast dot short length, and we're gonna show the toast, right? So this is how you make a toast. So basically toast is a pop-up message that appears at the bottom of your application. right? It is useful for showing some small alert or messages that you can show it to your user. So yeah, it's pretty much done, right? So let me build and compile this into an app, and let's see what happens. Okay, great. Sure, works. So the build was successful and the app has loaded up. So you can see, right, the text view that we used over here, we tapped into that property of text and then we changed the text that was going to be displayed, right? Welcome to ASJ, and the text, button text, is also changed to press me. So whenever I press on this, you will see a toast message appear at the bottom, right? So this is a toast message. You press the button, you press the button. Now the issue with this method is, first of all, the find view by ID method is very heavy in computation side, right? Calling this method is going to cost you a lot in terms of resources. That's why that is one disadvantage. And the other one is you won't know until runtime whether the view that you're referencing is correct or not. For example, if I type anything called like let's say no debug, right, into a random ID, so you can see, right, you don't have any error message telling you that this ID is wrong for this text view, right? That's what I'm talking about. You don't have any hint, you don't have any warnings that is given to you. So even if I compile this, it's gonna say launch successfully. Alright, let's go run. Alright, see, build, right? So you can see that this app, although you have a incorrect code inside it, is gonna build successfully, right? It's gonna build. Okay, do we have anything? Nothing. It's gonna build successfully, although there is a error. And during a runtime, right, whenever you launch the app, we get an error over here, fatal exception, and this is gonna stop your app. So you have a null pointer exception at find view by ID. That means it's not finding, it's getting a null return on the ID no debug. So this is very bad when you're designing an application, right? You don't want your app to stop right in the middle, right? You want your app to be foolproof of null pointer exception. So to solve this, we can use something called view binding. So view binding is a part of Jetpack, Android Jetpack libraries, and what it does is it creates another class full of references to that view, so that we can safely access that view. All right, so that is the purpose of creating a view binding. So when we are using view binding, we don't have to use these variables, we don't have to use find view by ID methods and everything, but it requires some initial setup, and we'll be doing this here. The first step to enable view binding is to go to your Gradle script, go to your build Gradle, model Gradle files, and inside here you have a lot of parameters set up for your Gradle, right? And inside this Android Kotlin option, you can go to build features, and you can enable your view binding from here. So view binding true. So view binding does not require any other dependencies, right? You don't need to add dependencies because it comes packaged with your SDK, your build tools, right? That's why only enabling it will do the work. Now after doing this, making a change in your Gradle file, you always have to sync it. Alright, successful. Let's go back. And now what's happening behind the scene is the view binding is generating a class, right? The class called activity main binding, which will hold all the reference to our views. So let's check it out. So like I said, when using view binding, we won't need these variables. Don't worry about these errors, we'll fix it. So after a call to a super, we will be initializing our binding. Alright, first of all, let's have a global variable. right? Private variable binding, and we'll keep it of type activity main binding. What's wrong here? Property must be initialized or abstract. Sorry. It's gonna be, it has to be late init var binding of type activity main binding. Now, what do you mean by the type activity main binding, right? So for simplicity, what is happening behind the scene is the activity main file, right? It's in this format. It gets changed into Pascal. So activity main, and then it appends the word binding with the file name. So if you have something like second main, right, you would have your class name as second main binding. That's how it works behind the scene. Now after you have a variable to hold the binding object, let's initialize it. Binding equals to, let's call our activity main binding dot inflate method, and let's pass in our layout inflator. So activity main binding, we call the class, right, and we tap into the inflate method, and we pass in our layout inflator of this activity. And what it does is it inflates this layout, right? So this layout will be for our main activity. So that is what is happening here. And when we are going to set the content view, instead of passing this ID of the layout directly, we can do binding dot root. All right, same thing. So binding is the object that refers to all the views in our activity main, and the root is going to be our frame layout, which is again the root of the XML file. So this is done. Now what about this? Like I said, we won't be needing the find view by, we won't be using the find view by ID method, so we won't need that. And how do we refer the views, right? We want to set the text of that view. So we go binding our object dot, and here you can see we have our two views, button and text view, right? You can see the ID over here, button and text view, same thing. So we just go dot text view, and after tapping into that view, we use this property called text equals to, we'll say welcome to view binding, right? Same thing, you just add the binding object in front, so we won't be requiring this. Let's do the same for button, binding object button dot text, press me, let's say navigate to fragment, because we'll be using fragment afterwards. And let's also set the on click listener, binding dot button dot set on click listener, and it's the same thing, so I'm just gonna copy paste it, and now we can delete this. All right, so now let me run this app. You can see it successfully built, the project successfully built, and here you can check, right, you already have the difference here. Does the same thing, but it's very safe. Welcome to view binding, navigate to fragment, and then when I click on it, you get a toast message saying you pressed the button. So like I've told you before, using find view by ID has many disadvantages, right? That's why view binding is very easy and it's safe also. So I would suggest that from now on you would use view binding. Now the next thing I want to demonstrate to you is we are using view binding in activity, right? We can also use view binding for our fragment. Okay, so for that, let's create a new fragment. Java is all fragment blank, Let's call it a new fragment. Leave everything default. Also make sure that this is selected to be Kotlin. Click finish, and Android Studio will do most of the work for you. Since we'll be doing a very simple demonstration, let's remove all these boiler codes that Android Studio wrote for us. Right, I'm going to delete everything. I'm going to leave the class definition. This is our new fragment, and this is our fragment view, fragment XML, the layout for the fragment. So inside there, I'm going to on create view, and instead of doing this, let's return our inflator dot inflate r dot layout dot fragment new comma container false. Alright, so don't worry about this code. It's basic code. What it basically does is it calls an inflator to say that we are using this fragment new, which is this layout, right? For this fragment, we'll be using this layout. Alright, done. So we have a new fragment. This is done. And one more change. Let's not use a frame layout. Let's use a linear layout. Match parent, and let's not have this linear layout. Let's add a text view inside. We'll call this, we'll wrap it, we'll call this ID as fragment text view, right? And tools text, let's call this is text view in fragment. Alright, it's in the top. Let's bring it in the middle. Gravity center. Alright, it's aligned perfectly in the middle. Done. Basically it's done. This is done. Now next is whenever I press on this button, I want to navigate to this new fragment, right? So for that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new function called function, let's say a private function, open fragment, right? Let's not pass in any parameters. And what this function will basically do is navigate or pop up that, show that fragment. Okay. Now before doing that, we need a fragment holder, right? We need a place where we can hold our fragments. So below the linear layout, let's add another frame layout. Match parent ID, let's have it as a fragment container. Is it right? Yeah. Alright, so what we want is whenever we press this button, we want to show a fragment inside this frame layout, which is gonna match the width to the parent and height to the parent. Means the fragment is going to cover the whole screen. So we would want to do that. Now in our function open fragment, I'm gonna call our support fragment manager, begin transaction, and then we're gonna add our fragment ID. We're gonna add r.id.fragment container, and inside that container we want our new fragment class to be initialized. And let's not add that to a backstack false, and add to backstack false. No, let's pass in null. No, it takes in a string, right? And commit. So let's start that transition, right? Transaction. So this should do, we should now be able to navigate to a new fragment. Wait for the build. Done. Build successful. Go back to the emulator. App is working. Welcome to view binding. Do you want to navigate to a new fragment? Yes, I want. When I click on it, alright, nothing's happening. Why? Fragment container backstack null. Add to backstack is null. Commit. What am I missing? Inflate fragment new. Container false. Activity main match parent fragment container. Main activity is there. Alright, my bad, I'm not calling this function. So very common mistake. If you have a function, please call it, right? Don't miss out. there's a gray button over here, the red gray color, right? It says you're not calling that. So open fragment. Yep. So now whenever we press that button, first we'll show a toast message, and next we'll call this function called open fragment, which is gonna navigate, or which is gonna show you the fragment. Let's build it again. Working. Navigate to fragment, click on this, you press the button, still not working, right? Okay, what's wrong with this? Alright, let's go back to this, see where I went wrong. Support fragment, begin transition, this is done, right? Go to new fragment, on create view. On create view, binding dot root. Sorry. So let's use binding over here. I forgot what I was trying to do. We are using binding, right? We are using view binding. So let's do something over here. Let's create a variable. We'll call this private var, right? Private variable underscore binding of type new fragment new binding, which can be null, and we're going to initialize it to null. And we are also going to have a private val called binding, and it's going to be a getter method which is going to return our binding with double exclamation mark, so we don't have to deal with null safety later on in this code. Now on create view, what's happening here? So initialize our binding, we go fragment new binding dot inflate, pass in our inflator, pass in our container, add false. Don't worry about this. If you have gone through the course, you must have seen this course, you must have seen this code multiple times, right? And what we're gonna do is binding, we're gonna return our binding dot root on create view, and I hope this works. Main activity, support fragment transaction, fragment manager, begin transaction, add new fragment. Great. All right. Non-successful. What's happening? Layout width and height is at match parent. What am I missing here? Frame layout, linear layout. Let's go back to my resource view. This is good. Alright. Why this is not working? I need to have a background for that. Fragment new, right? Where is my background color? Alright, Android, let's add a color background. Tricky. So since you don't have a background, you can't see the app. Did it build itself? Alright, finally, right? So the thing I was missing out was the background parameter. You need to set the background parameters, right? So see, it's set to white, right? Otherwise you can't see, it won't overlap our main activity. So this is actually a fragment. If you go back, click it again. So this is a fragment. Since we don't have anything inside, it's not showing up. So we have a text view inside a fragment, right? Let's refer to that fragment. Let's pull binding dot fragment text view. If you control click on this, it navigates you back to this reference. This is our view, and dot, we can do text equals to, this is text view, welcome aboard. Alright, now let's run this one more time. successful build. It's done. Navigate, and you have this. Okay, typo. This is text view. Welcome aboard, right? So this is the power of view binding, right? You make your code safe, right? It stops you from doing silly mistakes. So maybe you have a wrong ID passed in, or wrong, maybe a null value passed in or something. So your app is more prone to crash on runtime. You don't want that to happen, right? When a user is using your application, you don't want that application to just close down. So view binding is one of the ways you can use to easily build a bridge between your XML file and your program, right, to manipulate the views. So that's it for view binding. Next in line, I want to show you the course. All right, I just want to summarize everything that we have learned in this 6 units. So Android Basic in Kotlin is our course. Again, it's designed by the Google team themselves, so it's up to the mark. Our first unit is called Kotlin Basic, and it teaches you some basic Kotlin programming skills, right? So even if you are very new to programming, or if you have never written any Hello World program or not even written a single line of code, this unit will cover whatever you need, right? So here we learned how to use classes, how to use objects, conditional statements, if-else statements, when statement, and everything, right? We also learned about loops, while loop, repeat loop, and everything. In the second unit, we talked, the course takes you to building layouts. It talks about material design, right? So what is material design? Material design is a guideline designed by the Google team to make sure that your application follows the good practices, right? The best practices for UI development. And it also teaches you about color palettes, what are primary color, secondary color, and where should you be using those colors, right? What are 2 different layouts that you can use in your Android? One is night layout, one is light, right? So your app has 2 different themes. So everything is covered in this unit 2. In the third, the course covers the navigation part. So first it teaches you to navigate between activities using intents, right? So there are 2 types of intents, implicit and explicit intents. And after that, it teaches you about navigation component, which is a part of Android Jetpack library. It is a very handy, right? It gives you visual UI reference for your navigation, right? So passing values in between your activities are easier. So that is I think that is everything on navigation. We use architecture components, advanced, and then also we make a fully fledged application to showcase our navigation, right? And in the unit 4, the course talks about connection to the internet. It teaches you about coroutines and a library called Coel that helps you display images that you retrieve from the internet. All right, 1 minute, 30 second. All right, sorry for that. All right, we're back. Where was I? Connect to the internet, right? Unit 4. So Unit 4 takes you to coroutines. Again, one of the part of Kotlin, one of the feature provided by Kotlin. In coroutines, you can write non-blocking codes, multi-thread codes, right? Asynchronous codes, meaning that you can have a big chunk of data being downloaded in the background while your app is working in the foreground, right? So you can have two tasks that run simultaneously. Although behind the scene that is not what's happening. The task is being shifted back and forth between two tasks, but to user it seems that two tasks are being run simultaneously, and that is done by coroutines. And in this course we use that to fetch the data from the internet and display that. So I think in this course we built an app called Mars app, where we pull in the Mars photo URLs from our database server, and using a coil library we pass in the URL, and then the coil library fetches the image, right? So we did that in Unit 4. And in Unit 5 we talked about data persistence. That is, whenever you build an application, you would want some data to be saved, right? You want that data to persist for next session. So that is what we talked about here. Initially, the course, since it's beginner friendly, it talks about SQL, SQL language. It's very simple, very easy. If you've gone through the course, it's very easy. And next, it introduces you to a library called Room, right? So Room is a library that handles your connection between a SQL and your application. And in this unit you get introduced to a flow, right? So flow is like a stream, right? You get the data continuously when there is a change in the state. So a little bit complex, but don't worry, if you go through the course you'll understand it. And we also built an application for that. We built a forage app or something, right? So we would store some data in our secondary storage, and then we would retrieve it, right? So we did that in Unit 5. In Unit 6 we talked about Work Manager. So Work Manager again is another feature or another part of Jetpack's library, and it helps you to schedule background tasks, right? For example, your WhatsApp app, right? There's a feature called backup my chats or something, right? So if you select an account, to Google account or any email account where you want to back up your chats, so what you do is you select like backup weekly or backup daily, right? So you set a time, and even though you do not open your app for that day, the app will automatically back up your chats to the selected service. So that is what we talked about in Work Manager. And in this course we built a water me plant. Basically what that app did was there was a list of plants, and it would notify you whenever you needed to water that plant or something, right? So that is what we did in Unit 6. If you have been participating in this Android Study Jam journey, you would have already had a public developer profile, right? Started with these units, and these are the badges that you would have earned if you had successfully completed the Unit 1 units. So yeah, from my account I've collected all 16 badges, right? How do I check my dashboard profile? And if you have also completed the course and you have earned these badges, then please forward me your public developer profile, and you shall be eligible for the certificates and some swags. Alright, so this is how we verify that you have participated or not. There would be badges with the dates in it. There should be a total of 16 badges that you're gonna earn from this, and if you have done that, then good, right? Send us your account and we'll verify and we'll send you the certificates. Next, I want to So I want to show you the app that we are submitting on behalf of our college. This is a MyNote app, very simple application. What it does is simply allows students to take note, right? Put a title of the note, add some description, and then save it. And it just shows, it populates the list in a recycler view and shows it to the user. And if you have completed the course or completed the task, you can click on it and then select completed. Right, there's a simple switch mechanism of that, and this is the app that we'll be submitting from our college. So this app uses almost, not all, but most of the concept that we have covered in the 6th unit. So this app uses view binding, live data, view model structure, and it uses room database, right? So 4 things are going inside here. Let me show you the module file for this. Everything is same. Yep, the build features. We talked about view binding, right? So you enabled for this project, the view binding is enabled, and along with it, data binding is also enabled. So what data binding does is, the work is almost similar to view binding, but in data binding, the data for that view is being binded. For example, if your text view is showing the score of a cricket match, right, and you would have to later on manually update the score, right? So you would have to write a logic for that. But what data binding does is, you would bind that variable to a source of data, and whenever the source of that data changes, the view automatically changes, right? For example, if the cricketer scores 2 runs, then our text view would automatically update to show that 2 runs have been made, right? So that is the use of data binding. View binding we have already covered, and other dependencies that we use in this project are the lifecycle dependencies. These are the view model and live data. Navigation component dependencies, right? We are calling navigation fragment, navigation UI, Kotlin X things, right? These are the dependencies we use. And lastly, we are using the room dependency. This is for our persistent data persistence. This is what we are using, and I'll just roughly go through every file. And I have structured our app in such a way that each package has its own functionality, right? So MyNote is the application's root package name, and inside we have a data, and classes inside it are responsible for handling the data persistence, right? And inside the model we have a note model, which is responsible for mocking the table. We'll go through it. And I have a UI package inside which I have another 2 package and some other. We'll go through this. So first, data package, we have a note DAO. So DAO is database access object, right? So this is a part of a room library, and what this does is, the node DAO, database access object, is used to run queries on the database, right? So that is what we are doing here. And our database access object will have functions that run specific queries. So our get nodes function will run a query, SQL query defined above here. Get node is gonna run query over here, and insert, right, similar to that, insert, update, delete, get node, get nodes. So these functions are inside the database access object interface. The next is node database, and this is simply a boiler code, right? Boiler code. And what this does is, it establishes your database. DAO is used to access, to communicate with the database, and node, and this class is responsible for initializing your database or something, right? So version, it controls the version of your database. It has like, what are the classes inside this, what are the tables inside this database. For now we only have one table called note. It extends the room database class, right? And it has a function node DAO which returns a node database object. And this is a boiler code to make sure that the database object it follows a singleton pattern. Singleton pattern means that there can only be one instance of this class throughout the whole session of this app, right? So why it is there? It is there so that you do not have multiple instances that communicates with your database, right? This is gonna cause a lot of problem when multiple instances of your database is talking to the same database. That's why we have implemented a singleton pattern over here to make sure that there are no multiple instances and not more than one observer is talking with the database. That's why it's there. Inside the model package, we have a note, right? So note is a simple data class that mocks the table in our SQL database. The table name is going to be node database, and all these annotations come from room package, room library, right? So we can set the ID as a primary key, which gets auto generated when we add items. We have another column called title, description, is completed, and everything. Alright, so this is our model class. The UI has another package called adapter, and this is a nodeless adapter which is responsible for manipulating the data to show it in the recycler view. Okay, so pretty much straightforward thing. View model, so this is the main thing, right? It bridges your database and your UI, right? It sits in between basically. So it communicates to your database using a database access object that it gets as its parameter, and then it extends the view model class. So this view model has access to all the nodes and can run functions such as, retrieve the node, add a node, update the node. Everything can be done inside this. So that is for the view model. And add node fragment, node detail fragment, node list fragment, these are standard fragments, right? It has methods that are very specific to the fragment. All those common functions between these fragments are inside the view model class. And here you can see, right, you can see a similar pattern that we saw, similar code that we saw previously. It implements view binding. This is for view binding. You can see binding.root returns the root of the layout file, and yeah, we are applying recycler view. We are accessing the recycler view object. Add node fab, this is the floating action button view we are referring through the binding variable. This is the base application where we initialize the database, call the database main activity, right? It's pretty simple, does nothing. It has our nav host fragment reference, nav controller, and it sets up the action bar with a back button, right? And we have a function called on support navigate up, which allows us to navigate, use the back button on our app bar. So yeah, that's pretty much all for this app. Let me run this and show it to you. Alright, so ignore this. So this is a simple recycler view, right? So node list adapter does all the work to make sure that all the data are being updated properly. Like the node title is over here, the node description is here, right? Node list adapter makes sure of that. And whenever you click on a node, you get navigated to another fragment called node detail fragment. This is where you see the detail of your node. You have a title, you have a node, and you have a visualized UI for a switch that shows whether your task is pending or not. And if you have completed this task, you go here, you say completed, and let's say, oh, I made a mistake here, I need to make this a second task, right? You do that, you save this, and it gets updated. Second task, this is my second task, and your task is completed. And when you want to delete it, just press on delete, and it gets removed from your room database. The list gets updated, right? Because we have an observer set for it. There's something that's observing our room database, and whenever there's a change in the data source, our list gets updated. And if you want to add a new song, third ASJ under Studio Jam had a great session. Let's save it. You can see the list gets added on to our note. Right, so this is a very simple app, and this is what we'll be using for what we'll be submitting on behalf of our college. So that's it. We are in the end. I hope we didn't have any network issue today. Stream health seems fine. We did drop some frames. Anyways, alright, so this is the end. If you guys have any queries or any questions that you want to ask, you can directly ask me, or you can leave it in the comment section or the live chat itself. I will leave the stream online, right? The stream will be running for the next 10 minutes or so, but you can still send the message. I'll read and then I'll try to reply it. If you have completed the course and want to share your application that you have made, please push it out to our WhatsApp group, or you can contact me or our Discord, right? You can just mention me and then I'll help you with that. And that's it for our Android Study Jams 2021, 2022, right? It started November, it ends at January 10. So that's it. Any questions, please feel free to ask. I'll be ending the session now. Bye bye, take care.